You know, I woke up on the morning of February 28th, 2026, and I saw the headlines like the rest of you. Hundreds of targets struck. Iranian naval ships destroyed in minutes. The supreme leader of Iran, dead. And I did what I always do in moments like this. I took a breath. I tried to get the facts. And then I started asking the questions that I believe every American has a right to ask. But here's what I realized as the hours went by. Most people saw the numbers and moved on. 900 targets. 12 hours. They read it. They maybe shared it. And they went back to their lives. But I need you to understand something. Those numbers don't just represent a military operation. They represent a fundamental shift in how America projects power in the world. And most people, the honest truth is, most people have no idea what 900 targets in 12 hours really means for this country, for the Middle East, and for the world your children will inherit. Now look, I've sat in that chair. I've given the order to launch strikes. I know what it feels like when you're looking at a map full of targets and you have to decide which ones are worth American lives and which ones aren't. I ordered Operation Desert Fox against Iraq in 1998 for days of sustained bombing. I authorized cruise missile strikes against al-Qaeda targets in Sudan and Afghanistan. I know the weight of these decisions. And I can tell you, what happened on February 28th is unlike anything I've ever seen. Not just in scale, but in ambition. And we'll come back to that in a moment. Because the ambition behind this operation is what should concern every American who believes in the Constitution. Let me walk you through what actually happened, because the details matter more than you might think. At approximately 1:15 a.m. Eastern Time on February 28th, 2026, the United States and Israel launched what they're calling Operation Epic Fury. The Israelis have their own name for it, Roaring Lion. This was not a limited strike. This was not a surgical operation designed to send a message. This was a comprehensive campaign to dismantle the entire security apparatus of a nation of 88 million people. In the first 12 hours alone, nearly 900 targets were struck across Iran. Think about that number for a moment. 900 separate locations, military bases, missile launch platforms, drone production facilities, air defense systems, naval installations, command and control centers, the Revolutionary Guard headquarters, and then, the most consequential target of all, the residence of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran for 37 years. By the time most Americans were having their morning coffee, Iran's defensive shield had been shattered. 9 naval ships destroyed in minutes. 300 of their 450 missile launch platforms eliminated. Their drone manufacturing capacity, which had made them a regional power, reduced to rubble. And the man who had ruled Iran with absolute authority since 1989, dead, along with approximately 50 of his top advisors and military commanders. Now, I want you to hold those numbers in your mind, because numbers have a way of becoming abstract. 900 targets, 12 hours, 50 leaders killed. These aren't just statistics. Each one of those targets represented a calculation. Each one represented risk. Each one represented consequences that will unfold over months and years. And the speed of it all, that's what tells you this wasn't improvised. This was planned, meticulously, for a very long time. Here's what most people don't understand about an operation of this scale. You don't launch 900 strikes in 12 hours without years of intelligence preparation. You don't hit the supreme leader's residence at the exact moment he's meeting with his top advisors without extraordinary surveillance capabilities. You don't coordinate over 100 aircraft from land and sea bases without rehearsing every detail dozens of times. This operation wasn't a response to a sudden threat. This was a contingency plan waiting for the right moment to be executed. And that raises the question that I think every American should be asking. If this plan existed for years, if it was this detailed, if it was this comprehensive, then why now? What changed? What made February 28th, 2026, the day to unleash the largest American military operation in the Middle East since the invasion of Iraq? The administration says it was about preventing Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. And look, I take that threat seriously. Every president since Jimmy Carter has taken it seriously. Iran's nuclear ambitions are real, and the consequences of a nuclear-armed Iran would be catastrophic for the region and the world. I'm not here to dispute the threat. What I'm here to do is ask whether the response was proportionate, whether it was legal, and whether it will actually achieve the stated objective. Because those are 3 very different questions, and most people are only asking the first one. Let me start with proportionality. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said something in his press conference that I want you to hear because it tells you everything about the philosophy behind this operation. He said this was not a nation-building mission. He said this was a destruction mission. He explicitly rejected the idea of creating something better in Iran. The goal, in his words, was to destroy the shield that Iran had built around its nuclear program, and to do it so thoroughly that they could never rebuild. Now, I understand the appeal of that logic. It's clean. It's decisive. It avoids the quagmires of Iraq and Afghanistan. Hit them hard, eliminate the threat, and leave. No occupation. No peacekeeping. No trillion-dollar reconstruction. But here's what that logic misses. When you destroy a government's capacity to function, when you kill its leader and 50 of its top officials, when you reduce its military to rubble, you don't create stability. You create a vacuum. And vacuums in the Middle East have a way of filling themselves with exactly the kind of chaos you were trying to prevent. I keep coming back to Iraq. We toppled Saddam Hussein in 2003. We destroyed his military in weeks. We captured Baghdad. We declared mission accomplished. And what followed was not peace. It was a decade of sectarian warfare, the rise of ISIS, hundreds of thousands dead, trillions of dollars spent, and a region more unstable than before we went in. The destruction was easy. It was the aftermath that broke us. So when I hear the Secretary of Defense say this is a destruction mission, not a nation-building mission, I want to ask the obvious question. What happens on March 1st? What happens when the bombs stop falling and 88 million Iranians wake up without a government? What happens when the Revolutionary Guard, which has been degraded but not eliminated, decides to fight back through proxies in Lebanon, in Iraq, in Syria, in Yemen? What happens when the power struggle for control of Iran turns violent, and suddenly we're dealing with not one authoritarian regime, but 5 competing factions with access to whatever weapons we didn't destroy? That's not a hypothetical. That's what happens when you decapitate a regime without a plan for what comes next. And I have not heard anyone in this administration articulate what that plan is. Now, let me talk about legality, because this matters more than most people realize. Article 1 of the Constitution gives Congress, not the President, the power to declare war. The War Powers Resolution of 1973 requires the President to consult with Congress before introducing armed forces into hostilities. It gives the President 60 days to conduct operations without explicit authorization, but only in response to an actual or imminent attack on the United States. So let me ask the question, was there an imminent attack? Did Iran strike first? Was there a specific, credible threat that required action within hours rather than weeks? Because if there wasn't, then what we witnessed on February 28th was not an act of defense. It was an act of war launched by one man without the consent of the people's representatives. I've heard the administration's response to this. They say they briefed the Gang of Eight, the senior congressional leaders with security clearances. They say they informed Congress. But informing is not the same as consulting. And briefing is not the same as authorizing. When I ordered strikes during my presidency, I understood that I was borrowing authority from the American people through their representatives. Even when I acted quickly, even when the situation demanded immediate action, I knew I owed Congress an explanation. A real explanation, not a social media video. President Trump announced this operation on Truth Social, a 6-minute video posted to a social media platform where people share memes and conspiracy theories. He declared the supreme leader of Iran dead before any official confirmation had been issued. He called on the Iranian people to rise up and seize their government. He described it as one of the largest and most complex operations the world has ever seen. And he did all of this without ever standing before Congress, without ever facing questions from the American people's elected representatives, without ever submitting himself to the accountability that the Constitution demands. That's not how a democracy goes to war. That's how an emperor goes to war. And the precedent it sets should terrify every American who believes that the power to send young men and women into combat should never rest in the hands of one person alone. Now, most people are going to switch off right about now. They're going to think they've got the story. Big operation. Lots of targets. Khamenei dead. Mission accomplished. But if you stay with me for the next few minutes, I'm going to show you what 900 targets in 12 hours really means. Because the numbers are just the beginning. Let me tell you what happens when you destroy 67% of a country's missile launch platforms in a single night. You don't eliminate the threat, you transform it. Iran's military doctrine has always emphasized what they call strategic patience. They build capabilities slowly. They disperse them widely. They assume that at some point, the Americans or the Israelis will try to destroy them, and they plan accordingly. So when we hit 300 of their 450 launch platforms, we eliminated the fixed infrastructure, the visible targets, the things that show up on satellite imagery. But we didn't eliminate the knowledge. We didn't eliminate the engineers. We didn't eliminate the mobile launchers that can be hidden in warehouses and apartment buildings and tunnels we don't know about. We degraded their capability. We didn't destroy it. And here's what concerns me. A wounded animal is often more dangerous than a healthy one. Iran's response to this operation will not be to surrender. It will be to adapt. They'll move underground. They'll accelerate their relationships with Russia and China. They'll disperse their remaining assets so widely that no future operation can replicate what we just did. And they'll activate their proxy networks in ways we haven't seen before. Hezbollah has already warned of a major response. The Houthis in Yemen have launched attacks on shipping in the Red Sea. Iranian-backed militias in Iraq have targeted American bases. And this is just the first 48 hours. What happens over the next 6 months? What happens when the initial shock wears off and the desire for revenge crystallizes into coordinated action? Now, let me talk about the economic dimension, because this affects every American directly. 20% of the world's oil passes through the Strait of Hormuz every single day. That's roughly 21 million barrels. If Iran decides to disrupt that shipping, even temporarily, oil prices could spike 30, 40, 50% overnight. And that spike hits every American at the gas pump, at the grocery store, in their heating bills. The markets are already in turmoil. Oil futures jumped 15% in the first hours after the operation was announced. Shipping companies are rerouting tankers around the Cape of Good Hope, adding weeks to delivery times and billions to costs. And the uncertainty, the sheer unpredictability of what comes next, that's the most damaging thing of all. Because businesses can't plan when they don't know if oil will be $80 a barrel next month or $150. This is what 900 targets in 12 hours really means. It means every American family is now exposed to economic consequences that could last for months or years. It means the price of everything from gasoline to groceries to airplane tickets is now subject to decisions made by people in Tehran and Washington that ordinary Americans have no control over. It means we are all invested in the outcome of this operation, whether we want it to be or not. And here's what makes this different from anything we've seen before. In 2003, when we invaded Iraq, we controlled the narrative. We had allies on the ground. We had a plan, however flawed, for what came after. In 2026, we've destroyed a regime without allies on the ground, without a plan for the aftermath, and without any way to control what 88 million people decide to do with their suddenly leaderless country. Let me tell you what I see as the possible paths forward, because I think the American people deserve honesty about where this could go. Scenario 1. The best case. Iran's regime collapses entirely. The Revolutionary Guard, demoralized and decapitated, surrenders. The Iranian people, who have shown incredible courage in protests over the years, seize the opportunity to build a democratic government. The nuclear program is dismantled. The proxy networks wither without funding. And the Middle East enters a new era of stability. I want to believe that's possible. But I've been in this business long enough to know that best-case scenarios rarely materialize. Nation-building takes decades. It requires sustained diplomatic engagement, economic support, international cooperation. It requires patience that, frankly, I'm not sure the American public has after 2 decades in Afghanistan and Iraq. And it requires a plan that, as of right now, no one in this administration has articulated. Scenario 2. The regime is degraded but survives. Whatever remains of the Revolutionary Guard goes underground. They activate proxy networks across the region. We enter a prolonged asymmetric war with attacks on American bases, cyber operations against our infrastructure, disruptions to global shipping. Oil prices remain elevated for years. The slow bleed drains our treasury and our patience. And eventually, we find ourselves in exactly the quagmire the administration said it was trying to avoid. Scenario 3. Regional escalation. Iran's counterattacks bring in other players. Hezbollah fully activates in Lebanon. Israel responds. Syria collapses further. Iraq destabilizes. Russia and China see an opportunity to expand their influence while America is distracted. And suddenly, we're not talking about one conflict. We're talking about a regional war that draws in multiple nuclear powers. Scenario 4. Humanitarian catastrophe. The bombing campaign, as precise as it was, still caused civilian casualties. The destruction of infrastructure leads to shortages of food, medicine, electricity. A refugee crisis destabilizes every neighboring country. And the administration, having declared this a destruction mission rather than a nation-building mission, offers no help for the reconstruction. The Iranian people, whom President Trump urged to rise up and take their country, find themselves abandoned in the rubble. I don't know which of these scenarios will unfold. Maybe it will be some combination of all of them. But I know this. The decisions made in the first 48 hours of a military operation shape everything that follows. And what I've seen so far does not fill me with confidence that anyone is thinking 5 moves ahead. Now, let me close with this, and I mean it from the bottom of my heart. Tonight, American service members are in harm's way across the Middle East. 3 have already given their lives. The president himself has said there will likely be more. Whatever I think about the decisions that led to this moment, my first thought and my last thought are with them. Every criticism I've made is not of the men and women serving. It is of the process that sent them there. I have always believed, and I believed it when I sat in that office, that America is strongest when we lead with our values, when we act through our institutions, when we build real coalitions, when we exhaust every diplomatic option before we drop the first bomb. And when we go to war, we do it as a last resort, with the informed consent of the American people through their elected representatives in Congress. What 900 targets in 12 hours really means is this. It means we have crossed a threshold. It means we have committed ourselves to an outcome we cannot fully control. It means the lives of American service members, the security of our allies, the stability of the global economy, and the future of 88 million Iranian people now hang in the balance. And the question isn't whether we were strong enough to do this. We are. The most powerful military the world has ever known proved that in 12 hours. The question is whether we were wise enough to know what comes next. And right now, sitting here, watching the same news you're watching, I honestly don't know the answer. So here's what I'm asking. I'm asking Congress to assert its authority. Not next month. Now, I'm asking the administration to present a clear strategy with defined objectives, a realistic timeline, and an exit framework. I'm asking our allies to be consulted, not informed after the fact. And I'm asking every American to demand accountability, because this democracy does not belong to one party or one president. It belongs to all of us. 900 targets, 12 hours. Those numbers will be in the history books. The question is what we do with the days and weeks and months that follow. That's where the real test begins. And that's where we'll find out whether this was a masterstroke or a catastrophe. Now that you know what those numbers really mean, now that you understand the scale and the stakes and the uncertainty, the question isn't what the president will do next. The question is what you will do. Are you prepared to demand answers? Are you prepared to hold your representatives accountable? Are you prepared to be a citizen, not just a spectator? Because that's what this moment requires. That's what every moment like this has always required. And that's the only thing that has ever made the difference. Thank you for staying with me to the end. Most people don't. Most people see the headlines and move on. But you didn't. And that tells me something about who you are and what you're willing to do to protect this country. God bless the men and women in uniform. God bless the people of Iran who deserve to be free. And God bless the United States of America. This video represents independent political analysis and commentary for educational purposes. The views expressed are interpretive assessments based on publicly available information and historical parallels, presented through an analytical framework inspired by the perspective of experienced political leadership.